Thank you very much, Eckhart. Your teaching allows us actually to go into the darker place of this planet and to help.
Yes.
As a trauma surgeon, South Africa, working in Somalia, I encounter and help victims of the suicide bombings. Now, and you tell us when we are dealing with pain body, when the pain body is too big, we need to retrieve. How can we, as a collective, deal with such severe pain body? And it's really a collective question because we face it. September 11, Boko Haram, ISIS. And I know consciousness is actually beyond the duality of good and bad. Sorry for that you hear these emotions. That's just coming through me. Just these emotions coming. So what does I know? Even if we go, we go. If we don't survive, but as a collective, is there something as enlightened military defense possibly? Because sometimes we need to stop something, and the United Nations and other international agencies are there to help. They are probably closest to enlightened organizations that we can think of on this planet. Because your teaching, it goes far, it goes fast, it's great. It's not only for the individual, it's for all of us. Thank you again. So your just comments on something like enlightened military defense. I know it might be an oxymoron, but sometimes as a collective we need to defend ourselves when the unconsciousness is so bad that you prepare to strap bombs to yourself and go and,
Yes. Well, certainly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Certainly there are extreme manifestations of unconsciousness, and it is sometimes necessary to defend yourself against that in the right way. So we all know that in the past, when, for example, 9/11 happened, the reaction to 9/11 was not, to put it mildly, the most wise thing that could have happened. In fact, it made everything infinitely worse, because that was not a defense. It was an overreaction of the ego in the complete absence of even the slightest trace of wisdom and insight and repercussions, not to mention other cultures and so on. So the unconsciousness that we see being perpetrated in those parts of the world is connected to the unconsciousness of the reaction to 9/11, of course. Everything is connected. There is not one entity to blame, but the unconscious affects not only one area of human culture or one religion. It manifests in different ways, even in seemingly more conscious places like here. Politicians were extremely unconscious at the time, and that opened the gates of hell and amplified the latent unconsciousness that was there in millions of other human beings, or hundreds of thousands of other human beings. So everything is connected. Defense may be necessary sometimes if it's done wisely, and if it's not reactive but a response to the situation. Wisdom is an absolute requirement for taking right decisions, but unfortunately wisdom is hard to come by in political circles. It seems that as people go into politics, they might even have gone in with wisdom, but then it grinds you down, and it seems very hard to stay conscious once you're in the political system. But there are people here and there who realize the importance. There is a congressman I met from Washington who is deeply interested in mindfulness and meditation and spirituality. And here and there are people who realize the importance of wisdom. So any decision one takes of how to defend oneself, wisdom is required so that whatever you do does not make things worse. So, yes, in the face of extreme unconsciousness, you may need to defend yourself, certainly. Another more general remark about these events. This is only one example of humans creating something that looks actually quite insane. It looks, what they are doing, like the suicide bombing and whatever they do, it looks quite insane, but that is, how is it possible for humans to behave in such a way? And is this not evil? Go back to Europe in the first part of the 20th century. The whole first part of Europe in the 20th century, the first half of the 20th century, was a nightmare. And what humans did to other humans at that time, First World War, Second World War, infinitely worse than what's happening now with the terrorists. Infinitely worse, just unimaginable horrors. So that at every time period, the human collective, the unconsciousness that is embedded in the collective, will manifest through certain groups of people. And if you close one door, another one opens and it manifests over there. In the same way that the need for an enemy that is also there manifests. The Cold War came to an end and said, oh, how wonderful, there's no enemy anymore. And not many years passed, and quickly another big enemy arose somewhere else. And now we need to fight that one. I saw a funny movie about, it's a comedy, about a fictitious American president who probably won't get re-elected in the next election, and he says we need the Cold War, and this was done before that whole terrorist thing happened, but the Cold War had come to an end. The president says, okay, the advisor, you're not going to get re-elected, your opinion polls are low. He said, we need an enemy. And so who can be our enemy? Because if a country has an enemy, everybody will unite behind the leader. And they think, okay, we got it, Canada. And then the rest of the movie is the humorous how the media manipulates public opinion to convince people that Canada is the great enemy. The most unlikely enemy, perhaps, of the United States, except perhaps Switzerland or Denmark. But Canada is right next door, so why not Canada? Oh yes, it's called Canadian Bacon. That's the title of the movie. Now, coming back to the atrocities that are perpetrated in different ways, at different time periods. Now, it's certainly the case that we need to recognize that this is insane. It is a form of collective insanity, psychosis. There's one that is a benign way of looking at it. You could call it evil, but I wouldn't go. I would say it's just insanity, because it has seems to have no real purpose. They achieve nothing through that. So it's insanity. Now, if we go then to a higher level, a higher perspective, then you see that the entire consciousness of humanity is involved in an evolutionary process. And that evolutionary process, if you look at humanity with one single whole, the consciousness of humanity as a single thing, being just one aspect of universal consciousness. So this consciousness of humanity, and every human being is part of that one consciousness of humanity, which in itself is part of the universal consciousness. And consciousness, this consciousness of humanity, is involved in an awakening process. And you might know from your own life, and I know from my life, that the awakening process for quite a while involves intense suffering. So you know that from your personal life. I know it from my personal life. The awakening process, the intense suffering, is part of the awakening process. So humanity as a whole is going also through intense suffering, because we are all going through the awakening process. And the intense suffering that the individual goes through, a lot of that is also self-created. It's created by the delusional identity we call the ego. The suffering in my life was self-created. There are other forms of suffering that may come to you from the outside, but even then, the suffering is the reaction to the external events, and that is the real suffering, and that's always self-created. So both on a personal level and on a collective level, a large part of human suffering, the larger part, is self-created by humans. So they inflict it on other humans, and of course they suffer themselves eventually also. So these are what is called, there's a phrase in the Bible, the birth pangs of the awakening. These are the pains of the arising of consciousness. And if you stay now on the higher perspective, all humans are temporary expressions of the one awakening consciousness. And all humans suffer and inflict suffering, some more than others, but they are all humans are really expressions, all life forms, expressions of the one consciousness. The one consciousness is indestructible. The human bodies die. The essence that is in every human continues to evolve. So, although we need to realize, we need to see that what's happening is insane, because that's part of the awakening. If nobody sees that what we are doing to each other, to ourselves and to each other, if we don't see that it is insane, then we do not awaken through it. But if we recognize the insanity of it, that is already part of the awakening. And then there is a higher level of a higher perspective where you can see that actually there is an evolutionary process at work here. And it sometimes seems the two levels are contradictory, but they're both true on their own level. So I can make two statements which are both true. Things are terrible down here, and all is well, ultimately. Both are true. You can't ignore one. So you have to live with seemingly contradictory truths. The all is well comes through your own realization of encountering that in you that's not subject to time, the timeless consciousness in you, and from there you can know that ultimately all is well. And then retrospectively, the entire history of mankind, except the awakening, can be seen as a nightmare preceding an awakening.